Hello, everyone. Hey, tell me who you are. Put your name in your comment. Yes, and your town. I love that. From Fullerton, California. From Pennsylvania. Hello, Cindy and Mary Beth. Williamsburg, Virginia. Are you going to be at Wild and Free? Oh, I think I know who you are, actually. Yes, you are. Yeah, I'm going to be in Williamsburg, Virginia on Friday night for the Wild and Free conference. Doing the opening keynote there on Friday evening. So excited. Hey, Joanne and Danielle, Natalie, Renee, Vivian, Jeanette, and April Ann. Is anybody here who's here going to be at the Wild and Free conference in Williamsburg on Friday? I'm curious to know if I'll be able to see you there. So, oh, awesome, you are, yay. Hi, Rhiannon. Oh, yes, I know I have not been to a Wild and Free event yet, so I'm really excited about going. Unfortunately, I didn't think through details well enough so I could stay for the whole thing. So I'm only going to be there on Friday night, but I am excited to do the opening keynote on Friday night and to meet everybody there. So good to see so many of you. Amanda, very nice. Yep, Wild and Free. Awesome. Okay, so last time we did this, we had over 1,200 people live. It was crazy. About 400 to 500 people here live on the app, and then like another 500 to 700 coming in and out online, streaming online. And so if you are unable to comment, I know that Periscope does put a limit on how many people can comment. So I want to make sure we tackle that first. So if you have a question you can't get a comment in, or if I miss it as I'm talking, we are posting all of these scopes on my site, and this whole book club series is going to be on my site, and you'll be able to find the replays at sarahmackenzie.tv. So you'll be able to see the first one if you missed it, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. And this one will be available by the end of the week there as well. So don't be too frustrated. Thank you, Dawn, for putting the link there. If you can't get a comment in, I know that can be kind of frustrating, but write it down, and then you can be able to put it in the comments of the post when we post it on sarahmackenzie.tv, and I will definitely see it, and I will try to respond to as many as I can there. So glad you're all with us. Yes, thank you for inviting your friends. I love it when you do that. I'm Sarah Mackenzie. I'm the author of Teaching from Rest, a Homeschooler's Guide to Unshakable Peace, and also the creator of the Read-Aloud Revival. And what we're doing here, hello Jenny, what we're doing here is a book club on Teaching from Rest. And so last Monday, we tackled part 1, which was whose well done are you working for? And we talked about reframing interruptions, realizing what our interruptions what they actually are, whether or not they are interruptions, and what that means for us, our toddlers, the kids getting sick, which happens to us the last 2 weeks constantly. Oh my goodness, look at all those shares. Thank you so much, you guys. We talked about what it looks like when we're teaching and working with our children at home, how that is actually building a cathedral, why, and how we can remember. We talked about what it means to bring our basket and show up, and we talked about what rest really is, and rest as being the virtue in between two vices, the vices of negligence and anxiety. So if you miss, yes, negligence and anxiety. I thought I said that wrong. So if you missed that one, you can watch the replay at sarahmackenzie.tv. You'll want to look for the Teaching from Rest book club, part 1. And tonight we're going to do part 2. Just for all of you who just popped in the last couple seconds, I wanted to let you know that if you are having a hard time putting comments in the comment box, then the replays will have comment. You're not going to cry tonight. I don't know about that. I'm gonna try. No, I'm just kidding. That's too funny. If you're having a hard time putting a comment in, we'll have a post up on sarahmackenzie.tv by the end of the week with this replay, and you can certainly put comments or questions into that post, and I will definitely read them all, and I will respond to as many as I can. So if I don't respond to it while we're live tonight, or if you can't even get one in because there's so many people here, then you can do it on the post, and that will be just fine. Okay, and if you haven't grabbed Teaching from Rest yet, you can still get it. Of course, you just go to teachingfromrest.com. You'll find all the places you can you can grab it. You can grab the book. We have the book in print and on Kindle and a whole bunch of different ebook formats, as well as the journal companion, which we'll talk about tonight because I use it a lot when I'm working through the concepts in teaching from rest. And also with when you buy the companion journal, which is a download, and you print this out, you also get a audio companion that has 4 hours of conversations I had with Andrew Kern from Cersei Institute, Dr. Christopher Perrin from Classical Academic Press, Brandy Venzel from Afterthoughts blog, and Cindy Rollins from the Cersei Institute. So those audio conversations were really formative in my own understanding of what teaching from rest is. So if you haven't heard them, I think you'll enjoy them. Okay, so let's dive in. Part 2 is where things get really nitty-gritty. We get really practical. And this is really important for me because I love to live inside my head. And so I really enjoy a good philosophical conversation or talking about big ideas. And then I have to start living it out. And that's where everything gets really, really hard. Especially if you're reading in the afternoon quiet, maybe you have a quiet time and you can read, or after the kids go to bed and you think, yes, this is what we're really doing, and you get all inspired, and then the next morning everything falls apart before 8 o'clock in the morning, and you just think this is, you forget it all, and it's really hard to take big, beautiful ideas and put legs on them. And so that's what part 2 is supposed to do for us. What does that mean, living inside your head? I'm just thinking about big ideas and ruminating over philosophy and kind of getting all caught up in the poetic nuances of what maybe teaching from rest or a homeschool or educational philosophy means, and not really figuring out what that means, how that should change the way that my homeschool looks on a normal day. And so what I have to do is I have to force myself to put legs on it. Somebody says, are you an ENFP? How do you all guess that? Everybody always guesses what I am. Is that obvious? Yeah, I am. Actually, I think I'm an ENFJ. But I think my my JP is very, very wiggly. And so, I can swing either way. But I think since having the twins, I've just sort of gone morphy. So anybody who's not into Myers-Briggs is rolling their eyes right now and don't know what we're talking about. Okay, so let's dive into part 2. So I'm going to turn to page 22 in my book, because the whole part 2 is called Curriculum is Not Something You Buy. So what do I mean by that? I'm just going to make sure we don't freeze again with my phone data, because there we go. It'll make sure things go smoother. Okay. So on page 22, curriculum isn't something we buy. It's something we teach, something we embody, something we love. It is the form and content of our children's learning experiences. If we started thinking about school in terms of encountering certain ideas and mastering certain skills, rather than finishing a particular book or covering material, we would free ourselves to learn far more than we can by binding ourselves to a set published resource. Of course, we will use such resources to reach our goals, but the resource will be our servant, not our master. The first time I heard of someone talking about curriculum being used as a servant and not a master was actually Ruth Beechick. Page 22. Yeah. And I don't remember which book it was in. It may have been in her question and answer homeschool book, but I remember thinking that was an amazing concept I had never thought of before. So much of the time, homeschoolers, we feel like we get this curriculum that says that on Monday you should do this, and Tuesday you should do this, and Wednesday you should do this, or you should take 28 weeks or 36 weeks and do 4 days. They're trying to help us. What the curriculum providers are doing, and I know this because I talked to them and I asked them about it. Dr. Perrin was so wonderful when I asked him about this. He was saying, parents buy curriculum, and then it wouldn't be fair to just hand them curriculum and say, now figure out how to divide that up and how a good way to teach that is. We're busy and we really, really need the help from the people who made the curriculum and know it inside and out. However, for some reason, we allow that curriculum to then become our boss, and we become its servants, and we feel like slaves to the schedule, and we feel like we're behind if we're not keeping up with the suggested pace, or if we maybe do 3 days of Latin instead of 4 or 5 days of Latin like the book suggests, we're going to be behind and therefore we're slacking. Instead, we need to realize that the curriculum is not actually whatever published resource we bought. Latin for children is not the curriculum. Saxon math is not the curriculum. Those are the published resources that we use to help us teach the curriculum. The curriculum is the road we're taking our child on, is math, is the concepts and ideas that we want to present our children in math. You struggle with your expectations, not curriculum. Okay, so, oh, hi Heather, that's you, right? So is it your expectations being too high? Is that what you're saying you struggle with? One of the pieces that I think is really important to understand about, yes, being too high. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Michelle says, I hated classroom teaching because I couldn't adjust pacing for each student. I'm so glad you brought up the word pacing because we are totally going to dig into that in a second. With your own expectations being too high, Heather, I do too. I kind of waffle back and forth depending on the child and the subject. Sometimes I have way too high of expectations for my kids and I get frustrated. And the other time is that my expectations are not nearly as high as they should be. And by the end of the year, I realize that probably I should have had a higher standard and moved things along. Most of the time, my expectations are too high. And that's when a published resource can be helpful because it can help us bring it down and see like, you know, this is a reasonable amount to get in a day. However, most publishers of curriculum don't expect you to complete an entire book. So this is really well known in schools where there's, you know, with teachers, is that they don't actually ever plan to get through the entire math book, every single lesson in the math book. I mean, think about your own, if you went to school, think about your own education. Did you ever do every single lesson in the math book? Probably the teacher hopped around a little bit, picked which chapters she wanted you to do, and then at the end of the year, you didn't tackle every single thing. I don't know why we can't let go of that as homeschool moms, but we totally can't. We feel like complete failures. And so we have to kind of stop and not expect curriculum to do something for us that it wasn't intended to do. The first time I realized that was kind of an unfair pressure we were putting on curriculum writers was when I became friends with Dr. Christopher Perrin at Classical Academic Press. And he and I were having conversations about what curriculum is. I had written something into him talking about how curriculum is not something you buy. He said, we need to talk about this. Let's talk about this. And I realized in that conversation, in some of those conversations as they went on, that it's kind of an unfair pressure to put on the curriculum writer that they can know exactly how much content and what pace to go at for all of my children, who are all very different from each other, right? And for every child out there. And so they aren't actually expecting to be able to do that for us. They're giving us the resource as a tool, and the tool serves its master. So it's really important too, though. The first edition of Teaching from Rest, I didn't make this quite clear enough. So it ended up coming across, I think, to some as slightly more relaxed than I meant it to. Because of course the content is still so important, right? And of course pacing is so, so important. But content and pacing, they're only important as to how they serve our end goal. Our end goal is not to have our children finish 128 math lessons in Saxon math this year. Our goal is to cultivate wisdom and virtue in our students. And we will use math and perhaps Saxon or Math UC or whatever published resource you use to help us get to that end goal of cultivating wisdom and virtue in our students. I don't know, does Saxon math cultivate virtue? Sorry. Anyway, so when we're thinking about how quickly we need to move through the curriculum, and we're thinking about how much we're going to let that published resource tell us what needs to be done today and how quickly our kids should be moving through it, then we need to just remember that the end goal is cultivating a child in wisdom and virtue. And so these are tools to help us do that. There is no prize at the end of the year or at the end of a child's education for the kid who turned the most pages in their math book, or who stacked up the most history books on the table at the end of the day, or filled out the most worksheets, or did the most hands-on projects. There's no prize. The prize is being educated and being on this road of lifelong learning, and we can do that by cultivating wisdom and virtue in our children by using the curriculum for that end goal. So page 24 in your book, I talk a little bit more about pacing here. It says, we get so distracted by pacing. We've got to get through 3 more math lessons by Christmas, we say to ourselves, or else we'll get behind. It is wise to evaluate our pace in light of our child. The trouble arises when we value the timeline over the child God gave us to teach. I'm going to say that one more time. It is wise to evaluate our pace in light of our child. So we're not completely disregarding the pace. We're not saying it doesn't matter if we ever get there or get through this content. The trouble arises when we value the timeline over the child God gave us to teach. I'm glad you asked that. I saw that question. I'll get to that in just a minute. Whether or not you finish your curriculum by May, get through all the lessons in the book, or do as much as you set out to do doesn't really matter, especially if you are merely covering material while diminishing your child's love for learning. Here's the kicker. Pacing doesn't matter if you are sacrificing mastery and love for truth, goodness, and beauty. Dr. Perrin helped me with that line quite a lot. Because as we were thinking about this, we wanted to make it very, very clear. Pacing is important. We don't want to disregard pacing. We still want to challenge our kids. We still want to move forward. We still want to progress and help them build that wisdom and gain knowledge and learn to think and know and diagram sentences and translate into another language and do their math. However, if we are pacing, and if we're so concerned with pacing that we're sacrificing mastery and love for truth, goodness, and beauty, we've forgotten our end goal. We've made the goal the end of the book instead of helping our child become masters of their learning, and gain mastery and love truth, goodness, and beauty. Change the way you assess your success. The quality of study matters far more than the mere quantity of learning. So how do we put legs on that? That's all. I mean, that's one of those things that we'd read late at night and think, yes, that's right. And then the next day we'd get stressed out because our kid only finished half of their math lesson, right? That's what would happen to me. That's what happens to me all the time. So in part 2, it is chock full of like nitty-gritty practical stuff. If you have the companion, you'll want to work through part 2's suggestions and questions, because it's going to help you figure out what the most important concepts in your homeschool are, and then use a time budget and kind of think through your own curriculum in your homeschool and which resources are helping you and not helping you. It's not going to get you all the way to the end, but it's going to help you start thinking it through. But tonight in this book club, because there's just so much in this part, in part 2, there's so much material there, and it's really depends on your own family dynamics. I have 6 kids. My oldest 3 are almost 14, 12, and 10, and then I've got 3 toddlers, 3 and twin 2-year-olds. So our house is very chaotic and busy. A big, huge piece of whether or not our homeschool day is successful or not is based on whether or not we have been able to keep the toddlers adequately fed and alive and entertained enough where I could be working with a child on something and other kids are rotating through. That's going to look wildly different from a home where there's all older kids or mostly younger kids or more kids or fewer kids or kids with special needs, or right? We're all completely different. And so as we're thinking through the concepts in this same I mean, in this section, it's a little hard for us all to figure it out in this big of a group where we're all virtual, but adequately alive. That was great. That you said that, right? That is kind of the hope. Not completely alive, just mostly alive. Yes. Yeah. I think this is that Amy, or I can't tell your name actually. You said you're caring for an elder parent has changed your homeschool year. I'm sure it has. I can only imagine. Yep, nursing babies. Totally. It all varies so much. So as we're thinking about this, I thought, okay, in a book club with this many people in it, we're all virtual, and we're all so different, but we all have the same longings of our heart. What do we need to do tonight? And I think there's three big kickers, three main concepts that I really want to make sure that you get out of this part of the book. And the first is just that we have got to understand the limitations of published curriculum. We cannot expect our published resources to do what they were never intended to do. They were never intended to rule over us or to be the teacher. They were intended to be our tools. On page 31 in the book, you say, understand the limitations of published resources. Those printed resources you use, that you used to call curriculum, such as the math text or the handwriting workbook, are there to help you teach your students. Remember that the published resources are to be wielded by you, not to rule over you. Whether or not you purchase an open and go curriculum doesn't really matter. You can pretty much forget all the heated discussions about whether you're caving into school at home if you use traditional workbooks or a straight from the box curriculum. I know successful homeschooling families who use textbooks and successful homeschooling families who eschew them. I don't think that's a relevant debate to be having if we want to teach from rest and become happy, content, peaceful, and effective homeschooling moms. You are teaching your living, breathing, made in the image of God students. The resources are there to help you do that. It's that simple. We just forget when we get all wrapped up in getting through all the math lessons before the end of May or finishing every science experiment in the book before we call it good and move on. Remember, how far we progress in a book does not matter nearly as much as what happens in the mind and heart of our student, and for that matter, in ourselves. In fact, if a student grows to truly love an art, such as math, he is more likely to continue his study of math, or history, or language, or literature in his free time. You know this, I know this, but we've all got to start living it. We are spinning our wheels because we're frantically trying to get through published curriculum as if turning the last page in that book by the beginning of summer vacation will somehow mean that our children have learned something. The truth is they do learn something from that, but it's not at all the message we want them to internalize. We are teaching people, not books. In fact, a good book is often the best teacher, but we would do well to understand the limitations of printed resources. We need to stop trying to make it something that it's not, expecting it to yield what it was never intended to deliver. So somebody asked just a second ago, how do you do that though? Because how do you keep track of that? Because she'll find herself letting things, I think is what she, well, this is, I'm going to assume because I think I just saw one small comment, but I know it, for me, what happens is I'll think, yes, okay, I'm not going to let my curriculum rule over me. And it'll take us a long time to get through a few lessons in math before we feel like we've mastered them well enough to move on to something else or move on to the next lesson. And so I end up kind of reverting to what she said in her comment was box checking and list making in order to just keep track. I think there's nothing wrong with box checking. I am a very exuberant box checker. It's just that we have to remember to keep that practice, what that practice's intent is, or what it, I was going to say what its nature was. I was going to go all Andrew Kern on you. I won't do that. The purpose of the box checking is so that we can remember where we've been and kind of gauge whether what we're doing is working or not. So I check boxes. I should have brought that over here. I have a notebook where I write down, I check a box every single time my child finishes a math lesson or a, we finish another book, or actually we just studied 6 prints by Monet. And so every time we finished a study of a print, I checked it on a box. That feels so productive. And that's helpful to me as a teacher because, and especially as a mom, because so much of what we do feels like we do the same thing over and over again. It's hard to see progress. That's the way I can see progress. However, if I feel like we have to check that box, come hell or high water, no matter if that kid is crying over the math book or dinner's going to be late or we have to stay up too late or there's no time to go outside and play, that's when it becomes a problem. If I can use the checklist or the check boxes as a way to just kind of assess, is what we're doing working? You know, it's been about 4 weeks and we're not making that much progress. Maybe it's time for me to take a step back and figure out if we need to change curriculum. Maybe we just need to hire some help. Maybe my husband needs to take over this lesson for a little while. Maybe we just need to take a break from it. You know, take a step back and kind of review. And actually I talk about that, I think, don't I? I think I do. Hang on. I think I do. I think I talk about it in this section. On page 32, bake in review time. That whole section tells you the practice that I have for making sure that I'm not letting, well, in last week we talked about how rest is the virtue between the vices of negligence and anxiety. And I tend to slip toward negligence. That tends to be my default when I'm tired, when I'm frustrated. And so, baking in review times helps me not get anxious in the moment when things aren't going well, but it also keeps me from sliding too far into negligence because I have this review time set up where every 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however long you use in between your review times, you can kind of gauge your progress and see how it's going. Okay, so that was the first. There's 3 things I wanted you to really, really, really get out of this part. The first one was that we have to understand the limitations of published resources. Oh, you love the mug. Thank you. My mom got it for me. It's one of those Polish pottery mugs, and it matched my shirt, so I had to, you know, I had to get it. It's sweet and spicy tea tonight. Okay. The second thing that I think is so, so important in this section is that you need a clear vision, or else you're going to flounder. Actually, I think this is why we rely so heavily on those published resources. I think this is why we feel frantic and anxious when we aren't getting through every lesson, because we don't really know which lessons to cut, because we don't really trust ourselves to know how much is enough, or am I expecting too much? Am I expecting too little? And so we are relying on our published resources because we don't have a very clear vision. So we're going to do this. This is my very favorite way, like 5-minute exercise to get super clear vision on what your gut, what you're really doing, what you really, really want to do. So if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, go grab one real quick. I'll wait for a second. We're going to do it right now. I'm going to wait just a second in case anybody hasn't had a chance to grab a piece of paper. Yes, Monica, my record keeping method, I actually did a scope on it. And so if you go to sarahmackenzie.tv, I did a series called How We Homeschool. And in one of those scopes, it's a series of 5, I think, or maybe 6 scopes. You'll see, I'll go into the nitty gritty actually on what our homeschooling day looks like and how I keep track of with their schoolwork and stuff. Okay, you ready? You got your paper? All right. So I want you to pick one, just close your eyes for a minute and pick one child. Your favorite child. No, I'm just kidding. Whichever one didn't cry over the math book today, right? Okay, pick one child. It doesn't matter which one. And I want you to imagine them 20 years from now. And they're at a really nice restaurant with some colleagues and friends. And somebody leans over the table and says, I heard you're homeschooled. What was that like? What kinds of words do you want them to use as they're describing their homeschooled childhood? They can be words, phrases, adjectives, be a whole sentence. What would you want your child to say? Gut reaction. Don't overthink it. Write it down. This is a very different question than asking, what do you want your children to be like in 20 years? Which is usually what we ask. You know, we think, okay, how will I know if I'm a successful homeschooling mom? And we start describing what our kids would be like. Oh, it froze. Yes, I will repeat the question. The question was, your child is at dinner with colleagues 20 years from now as adults, and their colleague or friend says, hey, I heard you were homeschooled as a child. Tell me what that was like. What words, phrases, adjectives do you want them to use to describe their childhood? Now, the reason this is so different than asking, what do you want your kids to be like when they're older? Or how will you know if you were a successful homeschooling mom? Because what we'll do if we're asked that question is we'll immediately start getting anxious about how we need to be shaping and forming our child to become the way we want them to and turn out exactly how we want them to. That's stressful and anxious. Anxiety. Yes, exactly, Hibita. We start frantically worrying about whether or not the results are going to come out the way we want them to. And that's not even our job. But if we ask, what words do we want our child to use 20 years from now? That changes the story, because now instead of trying to change our child to become a person we really want them to become, now we start thinking about how we can change the environment that we're homeschooling our children in a way that will help them use those words when they're older. Now they're just describing the experience. We can change the experience, we can form the experience, but we can't be responsible for the results of how our children come out. And it changes the question entirely. It's all about the experience. Yeah, some of you are putting your words in the chat. I'd love to see some more of those. I saw wholesome, I saw amazing, cool, relaxed. I'll tell you, one of my top ones is story formed. I want my kids, when they're older, I want them to look back and say, my childhood was crammed with books and stories and conversations about books and stories. That is so important to me. And just knowing that bit of that important piece is going to help us so much. And I'll show you how in just a second. I don't want to miss some of these. Warm and fun. A time to wonder. Good to be with my brothers all day. I love that one. Laughter. Imaginative. Grace-filled. Invigorating. Peaceful. Oh, these are so good. Inspiring. Fun. Time together. Time to pursue my own interests. Prepared me for life well. That's a good one. Servanthood. Time to be curious. Oh, my word. Okay. I hope you're writing these down in front of you. Just a couple of them, your gut reactions. And I always say, don't overthink this, because if you start overthinking this, you're going to get anxious and you're going to put in answers that you think you probably should. I didn't actually see a single one of you put in there, got nearly perfect SAT scores. I didn't see anybody, I don't see anybody saying 20 years from now they're going to say, I really wish that my fourth, or no, let me say this again. 20 years from now your child's going to say, yeah, I read at the 4th grade level when I was in 4th grade. But I do see lots of stories and books and curiosity and inspiring, an inspiring love of learning and wonder. Scholarships would be lovely, if I'm totally honest. I completely agree. Completely agree. Okay. This is why this is so helpful. And this is why you need to keep those words close by. Because on a stressed out Tuesday, when I am looking at our day and things have kind of started to fall apart, or maybe they haven't, but I'm just stressed out because it's a normal Tuesday, and things are hard. I've got a lot of things on my plate. I've got dinner to make and laundry and all of these kids to teach all these subjects to, and co-op stuff happening, and toddlers are crying, right? Say I look at my list of things to do and I see a science experiment, a field trip, and reading a chapter of Huckleberry Finn. All of it feels urgent. All of it feels important. And I will probably feel like I have to do all of those things or I didn't have a successful day. But if I have my top 3, 4, 5 words that I've really thought through, that these are words that 20 years from now are really going to matter to me that my child uses. Those words can be my compass. Those words can be the place that I use to gauge what is the most important thing for us to do right now. We can't do it all. You can't grow a homegrown garden and do hands-on history and teach your children baking lessons every day and you have amazing math lessons and go on tons of field trips and be in 3 co-ops, and you can't. It's not possible. I have never once met a homeschooling mom who said, I was able to give my kids every experience I ever wanted, and we were able to learn every single thing we ever wanted to learn and read every single book we wanted to. You can't. So you have to make a trade-off. You have to make a choice. So instead of making that choice in the heat of the moment, when you're thinking science experiment, field trip, or reading a chapter of Huckleberry Finn, which one feels the most urgent right now? Just know. For me, I know. My top thing is conversations about books and stories, reading books and stories, and conversations about books and stories. So I know if I have to choose one of those 3 things, the one that's going to make me feel the best about our homeschooling day and it's going to get us the closest to my long-term vision is reading that chapter of Huckleberry Finn. And that might not be yours. And that's part of the beauty of homeschooling, is that God gave us completely different families and different personalities and different visions for our homes. And so that's why you need to use your words as your compass. So if we get really, really clear on our vision, then do you see how then that can help you be free to use your published resources to serve your homeschool rather than the other way around? Now you know where you're going. You have your 3 or 5 or 7 words that you're using, and those words guide how much you use your Latin curriculum. Those words guide how often you're going to do history or how many time periods you're going to try to learn this year. Because if one of those 3 or 5 words is my mom, oh my word, my mom gave us the most amazing historical education. We went on wonderful field trips to historical places and read the most beautiful literature, and I have this love of history. If that's one of your top 3 or 5, then you might want to put history higher up on your priority radar than somebody else who's going to say something different. But you won't really know that, and you won't really feel the peace about it or feel that whole anxiety shedding unless you get clear and you know why you're choosing it. Because if you have to choose one of those 3 and you just fire away and choose whichever one seems the most urgent, you're not going to feel like you did it intentionally. In fact, you'll probably feel like a failure, like your homeschool day didn't go that well. But you hit your most important things, and your homeschool day goes really well. So you've got to have that compass. So the first thing for this part was remember the limitations of published resources, and the second part was get really, really clear on your vision so that you can use your published resources for you instead of being ruled over by them. And the third one is do less. I love saying this one because I always feel it feels a little bit snarky, sassy to me. Like, thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful. Do less. Like I didn't know that would be helpful. So let me expand on that just a little bit. Well, first I'm going to type with my husband because this has given me a really good paradigm for understanding how on earth can I do less. In fact, the number one thing that we get asked at conferences last year, Dr. Perrin and I, was how do I choose what to let go of? I hear you saying I need to do less. I know that to do this well, I probably need to do less. How on earth am I supposed to know what to get rid of? And so I've been thinking a lot about that. How do we know what to get rid of? And are we just kind of guessing and hoping for the best? Or are we just like lowering our standards? No, neither of those. So let me tell you about my husband. My husband is a backpacker, and when he first started backpacking, he did it just like the traditional backpacking way. You know, he thought, okay, what do I need for a backpacking trip? What am I going to need for 3 or 4 days in the wilderness? And he'd load all his backpacking stuff onto the dining room table, and he'd jam it all into his backpack, and he'd lit it up. I'm laughing at a comment, get rid of a kid or 2. Do less or do less children. That's really funny. I'm sorry. Totally got distracted by that. It was really funny. Okay, so he'd load this backpack up on his back. And it was heavy. 60 pounds. He knew it was heavy, but he was at the beginning of his, the beginning of the trip, so he still was like burning kind of brightly with enthusiasm, and he's, I know it's heavy, but we'll be fine. So he puts his backpack on and he heads out on the trail. Well, it doesn't take that long when you're backpacking with a 60-pound pack on your back for that pack not to feel like it's 60 pounds anymore. Now it feels like it's 200 pounds. And the straps are digging into your shoulders. And the first time he did this, he said he started thinking through in his head as he was walking, everything that was in his backpack. What can I huck? What can I burn in the fire tonight so I don't have to pack it back out? It was so heavy. Everything that he crammed in his backpack that he thought he needed now felt like it was weighing him down. And by the time he got to his campsite, if he get all the way there, he felt like he couldn't wait for it to be over. And he was in pain. He barely stumbled to the finish line. That is pretty much how I feel in my homeschool. When I start out my homeschool year thinking, what do we want to learn this year? And I just start adding things to the curriculum. And so I say, we want to do science, we want to do history, we want to do math, and we want to do picture study and composure study and nature study, and we're going to read some Shakespeare, and we're going to do maps, and I think of all this wonderful stuff and I start putting it in. And then we start heading down the trail, and by about the beginning of November, I'm feeling like those straps are digging into my shoulders, and I'm not sure I'm going to get to the finish line, and holy cow, by May, we are like barely chugging along, and I think this is not working. And several times before there, I think maybe we should quit. So my husband discovered Ultralight Backpacking. Are any of you familiar with this? Tell me in the chat if you're familiar with this. Ultralight backpackers are, they're different folks. They do things like, well, for Ultralight backpackers, the principle is you want to bring only what is absolutely essential, nothing extra at all. And so they do things like they'll take a plastic toothbrush and they'll saw it in half and then drill holes in the little piece of the handle that's left in order to shed ounces. Because they don't want to bring that extra little part of the plastic toothbrush because it'll add weight. Probably fractions of ounces, but ounces add up to pounds. And pounds, we know what those feel like when you're half a mile down the trail. So they bring as little as possible. When my husband ultralight backpacks, he brings as little water as possible even, and just brings a water filter. So he plans to where he's going to hit water sources when he's going to refuel himself. Are you following my metaphor here? And he just plans to rejuvenate and plans to refresh himself along the way. He brings as little as possible. And when he does that, he can get to his campsite, enjoy the whole hike, know he's going to make it to the campsite, and enjoy it. And if I start my homeschool year the same way, if at the beginning of the school year I think, what is absolutely essential? Let's start there and just start going and see how we do. What ends up happening for me when I do that is that we have a lot more free time than we otherwise would, and the kids aren't burnt out on learning. And so we end up having the time and space to pursue interests and make crafts or go on field trips and read stuff. My daughter is behind me over here, and she just held up her book and started waving it. Read lots and lots of books. Is that what you're? Yeah, have lots of time for reading. My 12-year-old's cracking me up. So if I cram our school year with all these wonderful things we're going to do, I'm going to be stressed by it, and we're going to have so much to do. It's going to feel like I'm just trying to tick it off my list. We have to get to the campsite, and we all have to live long enough to get there. But if we bring as little as possible, we have breathing room and space. We have enough space to enjoy what we serendipitously come across along the way. Let me give you a more practical example. Last year we did geography Charlotte Mason style. And so what I did is I would take an outline map of a continent. My oldest daughter did Europe. And so I'd get a black outline map with like the countries outlined, and I'd give it to her and an atlas and say, label 5 countries, 2 bodies of water. Okay, she'd do it, did it, done, 5 minutes. Next day, I would give her a new, same black outline map, same kind of map, but blank. And I would say, label everything you remember from yesterday. She would. And then I would hand her the atlas and say, anything you forgot from yesterday you could add, and then add 2 or 3 more countries and maybe another body of water. So she does that. 5 minutes, puts it away, done. Next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. 5, 10 minutes maybe. What ends up happening is that you have this extremely simple and very, very effective way to learn geography that doesn't feel very painless, and that's very easy to get to every day because it's just so simple and pretty enjoyable for the kids to do, and it's very, very effective. But then what happens is I go to my homeschool co-op and I hear somebody say, we're using a geography workbook, and she starts going on about how wonderful her geography workbook is and all the different things that they're learning about compasses and landforms. And I think, oh, we're not doing any of that. You know what? We'll get the geography book 15 minutes a week. I'll just have her do 15 minutes a week. It'll be great. So I order geography workbooks. And then I hear from another friend that they're doing literature-based geography studies. Beautiful literature-based geography studies with, you know, some of the finest literature, and their children love it, and it's everybody's favorite part of the week, and it only takes a half an hour a week. And I think, but I love books and we love literature, and this sounds wonderful, and the kids love it, so obviously they're not going to fight me on it. So half an hour a week, I can do that. And then what happens is the toddlers get sick, or it turns into Christmas time, so we're busy with Christmassy kinds of things, or any number of things, and now I'm trying to do math and science and history, and now I'm trying to do the map drill, but that might slide because I really wanted to get to literature through geography through literature, which we didn't get to do, and then the workbooks, oh, we didn't have time to get to the workbooks, so we're behind, and now I feel behind and stressed, and really what happened is I just shoved a bunch of more stuff in my backpack that I didn't really need. Oh my goodness, that is the perfect, yes, you say your problem is that nothing ever happens like you plan and you just feel like a failure. Part of the problem with when we do that to ourselves, and I completely agree, is that we set the expectations so high and so unreasonably, really not even just high, just so crammed full, that there's no margin, that there's no possible way we could succeed there. So it's not about lowering our bar and lowering our standard, it's about making our standards match that vision. It's not just throwing stuff into our curriculum and our school day because that's what we think we're supposed to be doing. We think we're supposed to be teaching our kids landforms, and so we throw that workbook into the curriculum. When I look at my long-term vision, I can decide whether or not that's the best use of our time. Now, that doesn't mean that whatever my gut desires are for my kids as far as the words they use 20 years down the road, that's the only things we need to do in our homeschool. That means it's the compass. And when we're making trade-offs, and when it's time to make a choice, and we have to decide between two things, that's what we use our compass for. When we are able to harmonize what we actually do in our day with the vision of our values and what we really believe we want for our children, why we're homeschooling in the first place, I don't think very many of us, or maybe any of us, are homeschooling because we want our kids to have completed the most workbooks of any kid on the block, or because we want our kids to have spent more time doing math than anybody in our town. I mean, I'm not even sure I've really met a homeschooler, I'm trying to think now, who said, you know, I want my kids to test better than everybody else. I mean, I think we probably kind of all do, but in our heart of hearts, is that really something that's going to matter to you 20 years down the road? Is that the number one thing you want for your kids? Probably not. I'm just peeking at some of your comments. You feel like maybe you're not doing enough. You focus on math and phonics daily. Okay, so that reminds me that I wanted to show you this. Hold on, I'm going to read you something. Okay, so I'm going to read you something from this. This, by the way, is something you can have on my website for free. If you go to amongstlovelythings.com, right there on that page, there's a big green button where you can grab this. Okay, so this was born because it's called Hope for the Overwhelmed Homeschooler. I asked all of these homeschooling experts. Can you see that? Sonia Schaefer, Julie Bogart, Janice Campbell, Cindy Rollins, Lila Lawler, Rhea Berg, sorry, I can't see, there we go, Andrew Pudewa, Andrew Kern, and Susan Wise-Bauer. I asked them, what's the #1 advice you would give an overwhelmed homeschooling mom when she says, I don't know what to cut back on? Because when Dr. Perrin and I were going around to conferences last year, this was the question we heard over and over. How do I know what to cut back on? And I started thinking, yeah, it's not that helpful for us just to tell people to simplify and do less if we don't tell them how to do it. So I thought, well, that's going to depend on your paradigm in education. Because Susan Wise-Bauer is going to say something different than Julie Bogart every time, I would think, on what the #1 thing that you want to do in your day. And that's wonderful because we're all different and we're all made differently. And that's part of the beauty of the world. And so I thought I'm going to ask just this wide array of homeschooling experts. What would you tell an overwhelmed homeschooling mom? Then I collected them all into this download. So you can see like all their little quips and advice. And you can grab this for free. Amongstlovelythings.com, and you'll be able to grab it right there. Just hit that green button. So what I was going to read, this is the person who mentioned that she feels like she's doing math and phonics every day. She doesn't feel like she's doing enough. I can grab it. Okay, so this is what Susan Wise-Bauer would tell you. When everything seems to be falling apart, stop doing everything except for math and language arts for 1 week. Do a really good job with it, a really good job with math and language arts. Then add back in 1 subject per child every 3 days. If you hit a point where you're feeling overwhelmed by that, you may be spreading yourself too thin. Ask yourself whether everything you're doing is necessary. Remember that the younger your children are, the more important it is to do fewer subjects more thoroughly. So she would say, start with just math and language arts and just do that really great. And then if you want, every third day you can add in something. And when you hit your threshold, you know that it's time to kind of decide whether or not everything you're doing is actually necessary. And I would say consult your compass. At that point, you got to consult your compass and see what needs to go. There was this excellent quote on my friend Brandy Wenzel's blog. Oh man, I think it was last year. We'll put it in the show notes for the replay of this book club meeting. It was on a post called Secrets to Charlotte Mason Scheduling or something. We'll put a link up in the show notes. But I know the quote. The quote was, keep cutting back until there is peace in your home. Brandy didn't write it. I can't remember who actually said that. We'll have to get the post up so you'll know. But just keep cutting back until there is peace in your home, because nothing academically is really worth trumping the peace in your home. Your relationships with your children are far more important than whether or not your child actually finishes that math book this year. And I have never once, ever heard a homeschooling mom say, I am so glad that we did botany in 7th grade and that it didn't go into 8th grade because that would have just messed us up. But we, when we're in the thick of it, we forget that and we do worry about that. And I'm right there with you, sister, so I'm not judging you at all. I'm totally doing it too. I just know that when we're in it, we can't see that perspective. We have to remind ourselves. And that's why I think that compass is so important. So when you're doing this, when you're thinking through all the things in your school day and you're holding them up against your compass and you're trying to decide what goes and what stays and what do we make time for, you've got to remember that your time is a budget. And if you read page 38, I don't know how we're doing on time actually. I don't actually have a clock, so we'll just pretend like we're doing great on time. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, I'm going to read it. Since I'm not worried about the time, I'm going to read this to you. When you create your family budget, do you begin by listing all the things you'd like to be able to afford? Do you create a master list? A nice mortgage, a new SUV, a family vacation somewhere tropical, a food allowance that allows for eating out every single week? No? Then why on earth do you do it with your time? Don't begin planning your day by listing all the things you want to pack in. Begin by looking at what God gave you. I'll give you a hint. 24 hours, and not all of them are for work. The biggest problem I have with planning to use published curriculum resources is that they're all written for an entire school year, as if we need to do every subject all year long. Take a hard look at the 168 hours in your week and consider your non-negotiables: prayer, sleep, shower, eat, pray. Plug in meal preparation, rest in church on Sunday, and enough wind down time at the end of each day to ensure a good night's sleep, and you see what's left. That's all you got. The rest of that chapter, the rest of that piece is on pages 38 and 39. You guys are so great. Page 38 and 39. But the key point is, how ridiculous would it be if we created our budget, our financial budget for our family, just based on everything we wanted? But that's how we start our homeschool year. Don't we? Don't you start the homeschool year and you say, you start listing down on your list, what do I want to teach the kids? What do we want to learn this year? And you start writing it out before you even write in how much time or how much of a backpack space you have to fill before it gets too heavy. It's the wrong way. We've got to flip it on its head. So remember, as you're thinking through your curriculum and you're trying to do less and you're using that compass that we talked about, those words that you've chosen to guide you, then you've got to remember that your time is a budget. You don't have all the time that you want. My husband just brought the clock in here. I think he wants to take me on a date after this, and so he's going, wait, did you just say you have all night? Oh man, that's too funny. Okay, I will. They're not very happy with you, honey. They're all saying no. That's too funny. Okay, so I do want to wrap up. I do want to respect your time. I just want to remind you that there is no prize for the mama who checks the most boxes, who teaches her kid the most Latin declensions. There's no prize for the mom who... I wish there was, because I, in my box checking enthusiasm, would win them all. But there's not. It's not going to win you any awards. What he wants from you is faithfulness. And remember from last week, we know who we're working for. What he wants from us is faithfulness. To do the work he's put before us every day with all of our hearts and all of our guts. So as you're working through all the nitty-gritty details in part 2, and I would definitely suggest that you work through the questions in the companion journal for part 2. Just remember that your published resources are not meant to rule over you. They weren't meant to do that. Don't ask them to do what they were never created to do for you. Remember that you've got to use those words. You've got to get clear on what those words are that you want your children to use 20 years down the road, so that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And then you're going to have to get real with yourself and a piece of paper and a pen and start really holding up everything you're doing in school, in your school day, against that compass and against that time budget, and see if it's going to work for you. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Hey, next week we're going to do part 3, which is be who you are. We're going to talk about the truth about you and the truth about your kids. We're going to just all tell ourselves the truth about who we are and what we're really doing. And we're also going to talk about that seemingly impossible. What happens when it still seems impossible? And when sometimes it is kind of still impossible. So what then? We'll do it same time, same place next Monday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, just like we did tonight here on Periscope. Again, the replay of this book club will be on my site at sarahmackenzie.tv before the end of the week, so you can check back. We'll have links to the few things I mentioned, the articles I mentioned and whatnot during this book club there for you. And don't forget, if you wanted to grab this so you can kind of get a little bit more clear as you're trying to figure out your words and decide on your vision, you can grab this at amongstlovelythings.com. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful week.